Hi, my name is Miranda Cryer, and the book that I chose to read is called The Prestes Column, and it was written by Neil Macaulay. Neil Macaulay was born on April 10, 1935 in South Carolina. He died on October 28, 2007. Macaulay was a professor at the University of Florida and was known as an expert on the history of Latin America. Macaulay graduated from the University of Texas, fought in the Korean War, and shortly thereafter joined the Cuban Revolution led by Fidel Castro. Mr. Macaulay was actually a lieutenant in Castro's 26th of July movement army. He fought with the Castro regime to overthrow Fulgencio Batista, but soon became disentranced with Castro and his ideals, and left Cuba. Upon his return to the States, Macaulay enrolled in the University of Texas doctorate program, where he earned his Ph.D. After teaching for 22 years at the University of Florida, Macaulay retired in 1986. He is the author of many books pertaining to Latin America, including The Sandino Affair and A Rebel in Cuba. In 1991, after repeated attempts and denials by the Castro government, Macaulay returned to Cuba to continue his studies of the country. His experiences in Cuba helped to inspire two documentaries, one of which was finished in 2007 before his death, the other of which is currently still in production. The Prestes column was first published in 1974 and follows Luis Carlos Prestes in his attempts to overthrow the government of Brazil as part of the tenant movement. The book starts out with a brief overview of Brazil's checkered past, discussing such issues as poverty, illiteracy, and disease. The book also discusses the oppression that many Brazilians faced at the hands of their leaders. The first chapter begins by outlining the many coups that brought new leaders to power within the Brazilian government, highlighting the many instances where the military was involved in the overthrowing and then implementation of a new government. The chapter goes through the many revolts that occurred in the late 1800s to early 1900s before discussing Isidoro Lopez. Lopez was a native of Rio Grande do Sul and a military man by trade. Lopez began his military career when he enlisted in the army under the rule of Emperor Dom Pedro II. By the time he was 26, Lopez was a second lieutenant. When the Republic was proclaimed in 1889, Lopez continued his service until 1893. It was in this year that he joined a gaucho rebellion in the Revolt of the Maragatos. Isidoro and his fellow gauchos were forced to retreat at Maragatos, and soon he left the revolt. Although Isidoro Lopez had joined forces against the Republic, he was actually allowed to rejoin the military in 1897. He retired in 1921, and although he had no political ambitions of his own, Isidoro seemed the perfect poster boy for the tenants movement. He was soft-spoken, silver-haired, and blue-eyed, and he possessed a wisdom that the tenants so desperately sought. After some consideration, Isidoro joined the movement and led forces in revolts against the government. Chapter 2 begins by giving a biography of Luis Prestes. Luis Carlos Prestes was born into a family that had once been privileged, but had since lost its money. His father, a military man, died when Prestes was just 10 years old. However, because his father was in the military, Prestes was given the opportunity to go to school. At the age of 11, Prestes gained admittance to the military preparatory school in Rio. Prestes graduated with honors from the prep school and then gained admittance to the Realengo Military Academy. Prestes graduated first in his class from Realengo and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army Engineers. Prestes was soon made a captain within the Army and was trusted with secrets pertaining to the Revolution. Prestes, however, was disgusted with the corruption he had encountered throughout his time in the Army, and as he was secretly part of the Revolution, tried to resign from military service. Once Prestes had been given temporary leave from duty, he began to lead in the revolts. Prestes and other leaders of the Revolution claimed that it was time to oust the current government because of its inability to govern and pay back foreign debts. They were not advocating for the illiterate Brazilians, the poor Brazilians, or the end of imperialism. They were simply advocating for a change in government leadership. Fighting went on for several years, with Prestes and his column becoming an important part of the revolution. However, after the revolt was defeated in 1924, nearly 1,000 tenants fled northeast and back again, evading military troops. This chase lasted until 1927, when the remaining revolters were exiled from Brazil. Although the revolution ended, Prestes would play an important role in politics in the 1950s and early 60s. Prestes would back Juscelino Kubitschek in the 1955 presidential election. and Prestes would also advocate to have full presidential powers restored to the president. In 1964, Prestes was forced to go into hiding when a new military government took power, and so ends the tumultuous history of the tenant movement. I found that I actually really enjoyed this book. It was full of a lot of useful information pertaining to the subject of the Tenants' Revolution, and there was very little bias in the writing, which kind of surprised me because I'm so used to finding blatant bias in most of the historical works that I've read on my own. After finding out that the author had fought on the side of Fidel Castro, but then later left his regime, I wasn't really sure what to expect, to be honest. But after reading through the book, I found that the author stayed true to the actual history. I really liked how this book didn't hide the fact that the revolution wasn't about the people, but about a few select elites who thought someone else would do a better job in power. The book follows several different battles, gives a sufficient amount of information on those battles as well as its military leaders, and provides a broad overview of the history of Brazil, first as a colony, then as a country in turmoil. You can tell just from the writing and from the sources that the author is really passionate about Latin America and very knowledgeable of the subject. All in all, it's a great read if you're interested in Brazilian government, Brazilian military history, or if, like myself, you're just interested in Brazil in general. It's really important to be aware of the history of a country such as Brazil, because to know where a country is now, you have to understand where it's been and what it's been through.